Welcome to part one of Ecology Foundations notes. And some of these concepts will be familiar. Some just need a name, something we've experienced maybe through our activities. And some might be review of some ideas we've written down and talked about before. But these ideas should all be in your notebooks for Friday's quiz. So, what is ecology? Well, the activities we've been doing lately all tie to or have us thinking about relationships between other living things. And we also are spending time contemplating non-living things and their impact on organisms. So, by definition, we're interested in the relationships between living things, but also how non-living or abiotic factors influence them in their environment, those living things. Where do we study ecology? Well, we study ecology where the organisms live. We have a name for where organisms live. We call that, hopefully you already know this from elementary school, habitat. So maybe you think of different habitat types in Minnesota, like the temperate deciduous forest, the temperate grassland known as a prairie, or in northern Minnesota, where we start to get into the subarctic regions. We're talking about coniferous forest or boreal forest. So what do we call these large ecosystems around the globe? Focused on Minnesota, but we go to the tropics, and talk about tropical rainforests or the tropical deserts, temperate deserts like Arizona, or the tundra in northern Canada. They call those biomes. So we want to make sure you have a definition of biome for yourself. And I think we already did get that one in the notes. So how do we define an ecosystem? Well, ecosystem, by definition, is any area we define, including the living things that live there and the non-living that affect them, the non-living factors that affect them. So biotic versus abiotic, make sure you know that difference. So we can think of 40 acres of woods. We can think of all the deciduous forest in Minnesota. We can think of a tiny little terrarium. So ecosystem is defined by scale and size, determined by the person who's studying. So you could have a little scoopful of pond water and study the organisms in that little loop of scoop of pond water, and think of how oxygen might play a role and dissolved minerals might play a role, and light reaching that scoop of water. How are all temperature? How are those things going to be impacting the living things in that community? That would be studying an ecosystem. So ecosystem can be small, it can be large, depending on who's studying and where. The difference between community and ecosystem. So which is bigger? Ecosystem, we did define these two already, but ecosystem is bigger because it includes the non-living factors. So community is just the biotic of a defined area. So we could talk about the community in the ELC. That would be every living thing in the ELC. An ecosystem, defined by that fence boundary in the ELC, would also include the non-living factors that affect those organisms. So ecosystem includes more. So if you look at these two pictures here, the communities obvious in the picture, the red squirrel and the coniferous tree. But what's an abiotic factor that's affecting the red squirrel here? Well, there's differences in temperature. There's differences in sunlight. Looks like one might be a cloudier day, and the warmer doesn't have snow. The one on the right does have snow, so you're assuming it's colder. So, community versus ecosystem. So if ecology is about relationships between organisms and their non-living or abiotic environment, what type of relationships are here? So hummingbirds are the focus of this, but hummingbirds nest in a tree, benefits by the tree, but the tree is unaffected by the hummingbird, so that'd be a symbiotic relationship known as commensalism. We have a hummingbird feeding on these jewelweed flowers, getting nectar, and by going flower to flower, pollinating. And so that's a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between the pollinator and the hummingbird. We also see a relationship where this hummingbird is feeding on an insect. So they do eat some insects too. So that would be predation, a predator-prey relationship. If we look over here, these are a mat of lichens on the side of a tree. And hummingbirds strip these off of trees and line their nest with lichens as part of a camouflage. So they are benefiting. They're benefiting by having these lichens as a camouflage, helping their nest blend in better. Another interesting thing about hummingbird nests, they weave spider webs, spider silk, into their nest lining. So their nest actually has two benefits from the spider web. The spiders are not really affected because they can spin a web pretty quickly. You might think if it's a negative, it took their silk, but the spider silk in their nest allows their nest to be flexible and stretch as the young grow and develop in the nest. And the spider silk also has antibacterial properties, and so they have less bacterial infections potentially for their young developing chicks. So some kind of interesting relationships, feeding relationships, predator-prey, symbiotic relationships of different kinds shown here. And competition isn't very obvious in here, but obviously they compete for mates, for nesting, and they compete for territory to have this nest here. They compete for food with other hummingbirds or other pollinators, and they would compete for other hummingbirds for the insects that they're feeding on too. So, what kind of competition would happen in this ecosystem? What's happening here? So we should probably define competition. It's when two or more organisms are seeking the same limited resource. So think of these trees. What are they competing for? Well, obviously they need stuff out of the ground, taken in through their roots. So hopefully you know that's water. But their needle-like leaves or their broad leaves are all trying to be solar trappers, solar energy trappers. They're looking for sunlight, or they're trying to absorb sunlight. So they're competing for that too. They compete for space. There's soil nutrients that they also are extracting, and they're competing for those things too. So while it's not as dynamic as watching animals compete for things, squirrels and birds at a feeder, for example, these trees are in a competition with one another for all of these things. Here you have competition. The wolves competing against other wolves for this carcass. or a wolf and a bear competing for a dead carcass. So how are the two pictures different? Well, one has just one kind of species and the other has two different species. So this gets to how we can have competition that's different. Interspecific competition. That's when there's competition between two different species, like the bear and the wolf. Intraspecific is when the members of the same species compete. So these wolves all want dibs on this carcass, but they're competing against other wolves. So they end up developing a social hierarchy so that the top in that hierarchy, the alpha male or the alpha female, they get dibs on that carcass and so on. It's kind of like a pecking order of chickens. Because intraspecific competition is actually stronger than that within different species because they have the same niche. So down here we have different species of trees, so that would be interspecific competition. Two bucks competing for a female, intraspecific competition. So intra. What is symbiosis? Well, we went over this in class already, so I won't elaborate too much. So we had defined symbiosis on the board. And on the left, you see the mosquito on the host. That's parasitism. You see pollinator on a flower. That is mutualism. And you see raccoon in hollowed out tree. The relationship between the tree and the raccoon, one benefits, the other's unaffected. That is commensalism. So win-win is mutualism. Win-neutral is commensalism. And parasitism have one benefiting, the other negatively affected. I mentioned a bit ago, if habitats where an organism lives, what is the niche? I mentioned it in competition, interspecific competition between two different wolves or two different squirrels in a yard. That competition is stronger. It's because the organisms have the same niche. So what is niche? Niche is the role of an organism in its habitat. What does it do? How does it fit in? So hummingbirds can be omnivores. So we can talk about the type of feeding they do as organisms. Or if they are a consumer or a producer. Hummingbirds get preyed on by lizards, snakes, and orb weaver spiders. So they feed some of those organisms. They compete with other insectivores and nectar-feeding insects. So when you describe what they do, how they fit into their ecosystem, behaviorally, food relationship-wise, and even how they might compete for certain resources, then you are describing their niche. So habitat, where they live. Niche is what do they do where they live. So every organism has a niche. We could describe our niche as humans, and then each individual human also has their own niche, their way of life, how they make money, or what do they do for a job and work every day. This ties to our question of the day, our bell ringer question. So, what is food? We're going to leave off here and come back for part 2 for this next segment.